The fairy tale of cell phone safety. How big tech, social media, and the wireless industry learned from and improved upon the big tobacco playbook by addicting us, manufacturing doubt, and shaping science, regulation, and public perception. As this is a university marketing class, I'm going to be juxtaposing the findings of published scientific research presented verbally with images from advertisements, print, and video. All of the scientific references are in the citation list that accompanies this talk. My name is Theodora Scarrato, and I am director of the Wireless and EMF program at Environmental Health Sciences, ehsciences.org. And I have been working on wireless and cell phone safety for well over a decade. I have authored and co-authored several scientific publications on wireless radiation and public health, as well as wildlife impacts, and I'm really excited to be talking to you today. This lecture is organized around several themes: how screens are intentionally designed to be addictive, how these technologies are widely marketed to children despite evidence of harm, how wireless devices emit RF radiation with little warning to consumers, and how the wireless industry has followed a playbook similar to big tobacco by discrediting research showing harm, funding studies that more often show no effects, influencing regulatory agencies, and lobbying elected officials to weaken regulations rather than strengthen public health protections. Cell phones are marketed as bringing love, connection, safety, and yet multiple studies report an association between high smartphone use and social media use and increased depression in adolescents, increased anxiety, suicidal ideation, higher rates of self-harm, loneliness, and body image issues. And yet technology companies sell their products based on stories about connection, love, safety, knowledge, and freedom. I remember when cell phones first came out, and no one could really even imagine what a teenager or a child would be using a cell phone for at the time. What device, what technology has permeated every age group, in every setting, in every crevice of our lives, but the cell phone? What we now understand is that many technology companies are built on a business model that depends on keeping us online as much as possible. The algorithms are addictive by design. The design of the phone itself makes it hard to turn off. I remember when cell phones had an off switch, not anymore. Steve Jobs made the decision not to have a dedicated physical power off toggle on iPhones because he viewed the off switch like death, he said. He wanted the devices to remain in a state of readiness, resting, still alive, and ready to be revived instantly.
So, iPhone is like having your life in your pocket. It's the ultimate digital device.
The longer we stay engaged on a device, the more data platforms collect about our behavior, preferences, relationships, and movements. That data is extraordinarily valuable because it allows companies to predict our behavior and sell us highly targeted advertising. Everything is analyzed, our searches, clicks, where we hover the mouse, everything is a data point. Hundreds, thousands of behavioral signals can be generated per person per day. The longer we stay engaged on the device, the more exposure advertisements receive. Nighttime is binge time. Enjoy unlimited data from 12 to 6 a.m. at no extra cost. True, unlimited, nonstop data. Binge your favorite movies with Smile, but don't binge in the pool. AT&T's ad, get down to bingeness and binge until you drop. Wi-Fi is built for monster binges. I hope you are familiar with Harvard Business School professor Shoshana Zuboff, who coined the term surveillance capitalism. She explains that while industrial capitalism depended on the exploitation and control of nature, The digital economy increasingly depends on the exploitation and control of human nature. In her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, she describes how technology companies treat human experience, our emotions, behaviors, relationships, and daily activities as free, raw material to be collected and analyzed. The goal is not only to predict our behavior, but to shape it. We thought we were searching Google, she says, but Google was searching us. We are not just consumers, we are the product. Our attention and our personal data are the commodities being bought and sold. We are all addicted to this technology, and some people are so addicted that they can't get off their devices. And yet companies are putting forward their technology as giving us freedom. In fact, one of Apple's first commercials was 1984. It was introducing the Macintosh computer during the third quarter of the Super Bowl in 1984.
Your ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Because social media and apps are engineered to maximize our engagement and keep us online for as much as possible, screen time is displacing critical developmental activities for children, such as play, sleep, face-to-face social interaction, and time spent outdoors. Play is essential for healthy child development. It supports and builds not just our creativity, but emotional regulation, problem solving, and social skills. And when these foundational activities are replaced by screens, where the choices are only what is presented in the drop-down menu, it impacts children's healthy physical, cognitive, and social growth, as well as their imagination and creativity. And there are tens of thousands of apps for children under 10. Where are the warning labels on these apps? There are neuroimaging studies demonstrating that the constant digital stimulation of interactive screen media activates reward circuits in ways similar to addictive substances. This is impacting our children's brains. Heightened screen exposure in children and adolescents has been correlated with reduced gray and white matter volume and other structural and functional brain alterations. This is a study of preschool-aged children where increased use of screen-based media was associated with lower microstructural integrity of brain white matter tracts that support language, executive function, and emergent literacy skills. But have no fear, because the companies that created the poison, they have the solutions for us. On the one hand, we're told to binge on, but we also have control with Family Mode, your ultimate app for digital protection. This way you can supervise your child's online habits across multiple devices, and all for only $10 a month. And there's so many products like this from the cell phone companies as well as many other companies because parents are desperate to address this issue.
T-Mobile now has Binge On, so you can stream all the movies, TV, and sports you want without using your data. It's like free.
So it's okay that I binged an entire season during my kid's piano recital?
I've done that. Yeah.
I'm binging right now.
You know, I think we made a real breakthrough here today.
What?
Oh, he dies in this episode.
Introducing Binge On with T-Mobile. Stream video free without using your data. Other wireless carriers make families share data. Some way to say happy holidays. Switch to T-Mobile now and get 4 lines with up to 6 gigs each. And no sharing, just $30 a line. That's 6 gigs each, plus unlimited streaming with Binge On.
Now let's look at this image for a minute. Here we have a mother feeding her baby. When mothers and fathers feed their babies, be it with a bottle or breast milk, one of the most important things that they can do is be in eye-to-eye contact with the baby. Children's brains actually develop because of chemicals that are triggered in the brain through that eye-to-eye contact. And here we have an advertisement really showing quite clearly a confident-looking mom looking at her phone, not the baby. But now people are looking at their phones and not their children. There are even devices that are made to hold the phone so you can work on your phone while you're holding your child. Many CEOs of technology companies limit the screen time of their children. Bill Gates stated that his children weren't allowed to have cell phones until they turned 14. And here's Apple CEO Tom Cook.
Do you know how much screen time you use every day?
I do, because I get a report every week, and I found it to be pretty profound. And so I've dialed back a whole bunch of notifications and sort of stopped myself from being too antsy about picking up the phone.
Mm-hmm. So the CEO of Apple is saying, don't pick up your phone as much?
I'm saying we made the phone not so that you'll use it all the time. We made the phone to make your life better. But for me, my simple rule is, if I'm looking at the device more than I'm looking into someone's eyes, I'm doing the wrong thing.
Here's a clip from Facebook's first president, Sean Parker, who states that social media sites like Facebook are exploiting vulnerabilities in human psychology, and that social media pioneers like himself understood this consciously, but they did it anyway.
Parker, who worked with Mark Zuckerberg to develop Facebook, with a bombshell claim, saying the site was intentionally built to hook you.
That thought process was all about, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible?
This is Mark Zuckerberg 7 years ago.
As a dad, do you worry about social media addiction as a problem for America's teens?
Well, my hope is that we can be idealistic but have a broad view of our responsibility. To your point about teens, this is certainly something that I think any parent thinks about, is how much do you want your kids using technology? At Facebook specifically, I view our responsibility as not just building services that people like, but building services that are good for people and good for society as well. So we study a lot of effects of well-being of our tools and broader technology.
Mr. Zuckerberg, let me start with you. Did I hear you say in your opening statement that there's no link between mental health and social media use?
Senator, what I said is I think it's important to look at the science. I know people widely talk about this as if that is something that's already been proven. And I think that the bulk of the scientific evidence does not support that.
Well, really, let me just remind you of some of the science from your own company. Instagram studied the effect of your platform on teenagers. Let me just read you some quotes from the Wall Street Journal's report on this. Company researchers found that Instagram is harmful for a sizable percentage of teenagers, most notably teenage girls. Here's a quote from your own study. Quote, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls." Here's another quote. "Teens blamed Instagram," this is your study, "for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. This reaction was unprompted and consistent across all groups." That's your study.
Senator, we try to understand the feedback and how people feel about the services. We can improve.
Wait a minute. Your own study says that you make life worse for 1 in 3 teenage girls. You increase anxiety and depression. That's what it says. And you're here testifying to us in public that there's no link. You've been doing this for years.
And just this month in 2026, there is a case, a trial, where it is alleged that social media addiction is by design.
He was confronted over and over with internal emails and company documents showing that there was a deliberate strategy to get kids hooked on the platforms and to get them young. One email, we just read about it said that the top priority was teens. And if we want to get teens, what we really need to get is tweens, which means kids younger than 13. This was actual meta policy.
Collectively, there is a growing body of scientific research indicating that excessive screen time is jeopardizing children's mental and physical health. There are studies that link high levels of screen use with disrupted sleep, cardiometabolic changes, increased myopia, that's nearsightedness, and increased long-term risk of chronic diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes. But something that the research on cell phone and video game addiction and the health effects of screen time does not measure is our exposure to radio frequency radiation. Radio frequency radiation is wireless radiation. All cell phones and wireless devices emit radio frequency radiation. Cell phones, earbuds, laptops, tablets, Wi-Fi routers, smart speakers, video game consoles, and the handsets, smart watches, fitness trackers, Google Glasses, wireless keyboards, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cell towers. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but it's very much all around us. It is non-ionizing, meaning it doesn't directly damage DNA like X-rays or the atomic bomb. However, that does not mean that it is biologically inert. Now, industry, and in fact many governments, will say that it hasn't been proven that these are adverse to health. And yet, there are hundreds, thousands of published studies that document effects at very low non-heating levels. I'm going to play you a clip of Frank Clegg, former Microsoft Canada president.
I've spent over 40 years in the technology industry. My most recent position was president of Microsoft Canada, and I've seen the tremendous benefit technology can provide. I've also seen the potential harm if technology is not used correctly. In my opinion, our current implementation of wireless technology is not safe. I've met with experts from institutions such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and the University of Toronto, and I've met with an expert advisor to the World Health Organization and one of the lead scientific writers for Al Gore's team that won the Nobel Prize. Over 250 scientists from 40 countries signed a formal appeal to the World Health Organization and the United Nations member states expressing their concern over the harmful effects of wireless technology, and added an additional appeal for the effects of 5G, especially the effects on children. Hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers have been published demonstrating harm to humans and the environment. This evidence includes increase in cancer, sperm damage, reproductive harms, memory and learning deficits, especially in children, and damage to our DNA, nervous systems, and the cells in our bodies.
Children have higher RF radiation absorption rates proportionate to adults. What you are seeing here is computer modeling of cell phone radiation into the brain of an adult compared to a child. And this is by an engineering team from the federal universities in Brazil. So yellow is the highest rate of absorption, and it goes to orange, red, purple, and blue. And this image is from a 2018 study that looked at a cell phone to the ear, and it also looked at virtual reality positions with the phone in front of the eyes, and they found that in all of these positions, children had higher rates of absorption compared to adults. There was a 10-fold greater absorption rate into the cerebellum and bone marrow of the skull of the child, measurements that showed a 30-fold greater in the hippocampus of children, and a 2 to almost 5-fold level into the eyes. This is another simulation from a paper looking at Wi-Fi radiation from a laptop into the head of a child with a tablet at 6 inches from the eye lens. And companies show us happy, smiling children with devices in front of them without any information about the fact that they are emitting RF radiation. This is a simulation of a laptop 10 centimeters away from the body and then at 20 centimeters from the body. And this study was looking at the distance of the laptop from different parts of the body and what the absorption rate would be in the body depending on that distance. Because one important thing to know as you listen to the rest of my talk is that distance matters. If you have the device on a table and not on your lap, there's going to be less exposure to your reproductive organs, generally speaking, and having the device away from you can decrease your exposure. And of course, the best way to reduce your exposure is by using an Ethernet cord, because that way the data, the information, the signal is going through the wire and not into your body. Now, the reason that there's been so much research around cell phone radiation is because when cell phones were first brought to market, there was not testing for long-term safety. They were brought in as being a low-powered device, and the understanding was that heating was the only harm. And the way that radio frequency, which is also microwaves, can heat is at very high power, like your microwave oven. At high levels, it's going to overheat tissue or your food. You wouldn't want to do that to your brain. So phones and cell towers and wireless devices, the emissions from those devices is very low, at least low enough that it doesn't overheat tissue in the way that when you cook your food in a microwave it does. However, low, when it comes to radio frequency, does not necessarily mean safe. In fact, the majority of wireless radiation studies have reported effects on key endpoints. Oxidative stress, which contributes to all kinds of chronic diseases, genetic impacts, neurological impacts, impacts to the nervous system, as well as impacts to reproduction and development, decreased and damaged sperm, decreased testosterone, testicular damage, impacts to the ovarian environment and follicles. There are a lot of experimental studies that have been done on animals that found just a broad range of effect, and kind of like smoking, to almost every organ of the body. However, low, when it comes to radio frequency, does not necessarily mean safe. Humans and all living beings on the earth evolved under natural electromagnetic fields, both ionizing and non-ionizing. But cell tower and cell phone radiation is not natural. It is artificial, machine-generated, pulsed and modulated, and they're very complex signals. If you think about it, a wireless signal has a lot of characteristics that are not found regularly in nature. We didn't evolve under these signals.
A new moment in wireless has begun. T-Mobile and Sprint are joining forces. By bringing together our two networks, T-Mobile will build America's largest and most reliable 5G network with more towers, more engineers, and more coverage. You'll get the best 5G network and the best prices.
There's a revolution on the way. It's the 5G revolution. Although some say this will be more like an experiment that will affect billions of people. 5G stands for fifth generation mobile services. The internet will be faster than ever. Downloading a high-definition movie will take mere seconds. By 2025, the European Commission is planning for all urban areas across the continent to have seamless 5G coverage. This will enable a new age in the Internet of Things. Smart driverless cars and smart hospitals, smart fridges, coffee makers, and even baby diapers. But what citizens are not told is that for this to happen, countless new antennas will be added. In our neighborhoods, our workplaces, even in our homes. Are mobile communications dangerous? The scientific community is divided. Some experts maintain they are safe, others have serious concerns. In 2011, the WHO classified electromagnetic fields associated with cell phones as possibly carcinogenic to humans. And studies published in 2018 showed that when rats were exposed to such fields, it increased their risk of certain types of cancer. Even among those who believe the technology is safe, many admit that more studies are needed. And for 5G, there are almost no studies. Telecom companies themselves have noted that electromagnetic signals may pose health risks. So why are the EU Commission and our governments turning a blind eye? They cite guidelines established by transnational scientific bodies. But Investigate Europe has found that these bodies are closed clubs. People with dissenting opinions are not invited in. And a significant number of the scientists involved have received funding from companies with vested interests in the 5G rollout. There is no risk-free society. Other things we consume are also bad for our health, from alcohol to junk food. But if you don't want a hamburger, you can simply avoid hamburgers. With 5G, there is no opt-out.
And what about AirPods? They say that Bluetooth radiation is just so low, it really can't hurt you. Well, this is a study by Yale researchers published in Cell Reports where they documented biological effects from RF radiation exposure at Bluetooth frequency and power levels. These are levels 4,000 times lower than the FCC and ICNIRP limits for what is allowable to human exposures. What they found was that RF radiation interfered with neurodevelopment and increased the expression of autism-related genes in laboratory models of the fetal brain. This was a state-of-the-art study, not on humans, but using cortical organoids. They're tiny, lab-grown models of the developing human brain. They're not full brains and they have no consciousness, but they closely mimic the early fetal brain. And scientists use these models to test environmental exposures like air pollution, microplastics, and diesel fuel to see how it might affect human development. And here's another recent study published in ACS Nano by Zhang et al. They found that the static magnetic fields at levels from earphones, AirPods, and smartphones increased the accumulation of airborne air pollution magnetite nanoparticles in the brains of mice by 5-fold. What they did was they exposed mice to both levels of a static magnetic field as you would get from a wireless earphone, and then they also had them inhale air with air pollution particles in them. And they found that the mice had impaired learning and memory, along with molecular changes in the brain pathways associated with neuronal stress and neurodegeneration. Wireless devices don't just emit RF. There's actually other non-ionizing electromagnetic fields coming out of these devices. So wireless devices and laptops and all of our electronics emit not just radio frequency if they're wireless, but also magnetic fields from the battery, and also extremely low frequency electric fields, and artificial light, which is a non-ionizing kind of electromagnetic field. So this study was on static magnetic fields. And what you're seeing here is a video showing just how strong the magnets are in the wireless earbuds and their ability to magnetically attract. You can see the particles moving and clustering towards the magnet when they are exposed to the magnetic field from the earphone. And yet there's been no pre-market safety testing to ensure safety. Now, I assumed when I learned about this issue that there was a consensus for safety, but actually there is not. There are hundreds of scientists, medical professionals, and public health experts that say we need to reduce exposure. As an example, the EMF Scientist Appeal is signed on to by 258 scientists from 44 nations, and these are experts who have published on non-ionizing electromagnetic fields.
I'm Dr. Martin Blank from the Department of Physiology and Cellular Biophysics at Columbia University. It is distressing for me and more than 160 colleagues who today are petitioning the United Nations requesting that they address this problem. We are scientists and engineers, and I am here to tell you we have created something that is harming us, and it is getting out of control. Before Edison's light bulb, there was very little electromagnetic radiation in our environment. The levels today are very many times higher than natural background levels and are growing rapidly because of all the new devices that emit this radiation.
And they say effects include increased cancer risk, cellular stress, increase in harmful free radicals, genetic damages, structural and functional changes of the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being in humans. There is a 2020 consensus statement of United Kingdom and international medical and scientific experts and practitioners on the health effects of non-ionizing radiation. And in fact, there are appeals going back decades where scientists and experts have signed on saying, we have a problem, we need to reduce exposure. And I have a whole list of these at Environmental Health Sciences if you're interested. Governments do have limits on what is allowed for wireless radiation. Now, the FCC and ICNIRP limits are among the highest in the world. Many countries enforce stricter limits, especially for children's areas, for schools, or for homes where you spend a lot of time. Countries like Italy, Switzerland, and Belgium have much more stringent limits. Although the Belgium and the Italian limits have been loosened, they are not loosened all the way up to where the FCC and ICNIRP are. Now, the United Kingdom follows ICNIRP limits, but those limits, as I discussed, are only set on protection against overheating effects. That idea that heating is the only harm was actually from a series of animal experiments done in the 1980s and earlier, where they overheated animals. And as you'll hear, they are not based on studies of long-term exposure, but very short-term exposures to small animals. Now, 30 years since those limits were developed, it would be unacceptable to set limits based on that kind of thinking, based on that science and that methodology. Dr. Ronald Melnick, a senior toxicologist for many years at the U.S. National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, can explain.
I first want to go into the basis for the exposures that limits that have been established by the ICNIRP and the FCC. These go back to studies that were conducted in monkeys by the Navy, U.S. Navy Department in the 1980s. And what the studies were based on were rats and monkeys that were trained to push a lever to obtain food. And after they were trained, they were exposed to radio frequency radiation at different frequencies and power levels. And what was reported was that at approximately a specific absorption rate, this is a measure of the internal absorption of the energy, that at that level of 4 watts per kilogram and higher, the response rates were decreased. This occurred in rats and in monkeys as well. And with monkeys, in addition, there was a 1 degree rise in their body temperature. So a few things about this. One is the number of animals that were studied in these particular groups was very small. There were 8 rats and 5 monkeys. And this is the basis for the exposure limits that are being used throughout the world. The studies were 40-minute or 60-minute durations. These are acute exposures. They don't tell you anything about long-term exposure. And they're only a single endpoint, this behavioral response to pressing a lever. This does not meet any reasonable standard for characterizing the potential of a hazardous agent.
Let's imagine that those limits were adequate and that everyone agreed those limits were adequate. Did you know that there are fine print warnings inside the manual or settings deep in your phone that say the phone should be at a distance from your body. For the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 5G, it's 1.5 centimeters. It states body-worn SAR testing. That's the test they do before phones are brought to market to ensure that the RF radiation levels are within government limits that were set decades ago and haven't changed since. This says body-worn SAR testing has been carried out at a separation distance of 1.5 centimeter. To meet RF exposure guidelines during body-worn operation, this device should be positioned at least this distance away from the body. The more recent iPhones say 5 millimeters, but they used to be 10 millimeters, and before that 15 millimeters.
And then when you read the actual insert that people never read, frankly, that comes with the phone, it does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting, and the iPhone 4 gives a similar warning as well. It's tough to do, obviously. What is interesting here, Anderson, if you dig a little bit deeper into this, what you find is that there is a certain amount of radiation that is considered the FCC limit. But that limit is sort of dictated by having the phone about an inch away from your head. If you move it closer to your head, they say they can no longer guarantee that your phone isn't emitting more radiation than the FCC limit, which is just stunning to me.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, City Attorney, City Manager, ladies and gentlemen. Cell phones cause cancer. That's what numerous doctors and scientists from all around the world have been warning us about for years. On May 31st, 2011, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, part of the World Health Organization, put out a report that says your chance of becoming a cancer victim doubles once you hit the 10-year mark of using cell phones for a minimum of 30 minutes per day. And yes, there are industry-funded studies that tell us not to worry about cell phones, or that it'll take another 20 or 30 years of research before we know whether cell phones cause cancer. In essence, they're telling us to treat cell phones like cigarettes 30 years ago. I, for one, happen to know that cell phones do cause cancer because everything we're being warned about by the World Health Organization's report fits me. I'm an attorney. From 2001 to 2011, I used to use cell phones a lot more than just 30 minutes a day. I always held it in my left hand, up against my left ear, and I carried them around in my suit jacket's inner pockets. Lo and behold, if you were standing close to me, you'd see that there's a scar on my left hand, the result of nerve tumor removal surgery. If you can see the scar on the left side of my head, that's the result of brain cancer surgery on August 23rd, 2011. That's glioblastoma multiforme level 4. On top of that, I have an MRI that shows a tumor at my aortic bifurcation, right where my cell phone sat in my suit jackets. So that's 1, 2, 3 results of having a cell phone against my body. If you don't agree, just read through the booklet that was in the box when you bought your cell phone. If you have the time to dig through those 200 or 300 pages, somewhere in there you'll see that your cell phone emits a type of non-ionized radiation into your body. Radiation that they prefer to talk about as radio frequency and specific absorption rate. Somewhere near the term SAR, you'll see them asking you to always keep your cell phone away from your body because of the radiation. And by body, they mean your entire body. So if you're one of the people we saw on the news standing in line to get your hands on an iPhone 5, please be advised that somewhere in that manual, they're telling you to always keep it at least 10 millimeters away from your body. That's about an inch. Did you know that you're supposed to keep that thing an inch away from your body? Do your children know that? I'm pretty sure that's not what they see on TV or anything that we see in cell phone commercials.
Phones are pre-market tested with a space, a separation distance between the phone and the body dummy. That's why there are these fine print instructions. I certainly assumed, and perhaps many of you assume, that when you buy a phone, it's tested in every single way you could use the phone, right? It's tested pressed up to your head close. It's tested like this. You know how people use it like that? It's tested like this. People press the phone to their chest and look down. Women who are pregnant will rest it right on their abdomen, right? So you'll have this part pressed to the abdomen. And that's where some antennas are on some phones. So this is the body phantom that's used to test devices. It's filled with a thick sugar and salt liquid, supposedly to replicate body tissues. And by the way, this was developed decades ago. It is outdated and completely obsolete as a method for testing RF radiation exposure on so many counts, but this is the way we test it. The phone is placed in different positions against the body phantom, and then the probe is measuring the field in the liquid. And phones need to pass this test in order to come to market.
So why does the government allow phones to be tested at a distance?
Okay, so this is where we do the body measurements, is on the flat phantom.
And what will happen when we test them the way you actually wear them?
So first you're going to do it with the distance?
Yeah.
Chief Engineer Jay Moulton is helping us find out.
First measurement we'll do is with a 5 millimeter gap, which this is a 5 millimeter distance.
Because that's how they test it? With a 5 millimeter distance?
This is how Apple did the original test.
Apple tests closer than many at 5 millimeters. LG does their testing at 10. Samsung tests this phone at 15. That's a full 1.5 centimeters away from the body, the maximum allowed.
That seems like, who wears their phone 15 millimeters away?
It's a big gap.
A gap that was designed in the day of holsters. The results from the first test, the way manufacturers do it, are in. All 3 phones come within the safety limit.
Okay, so that's no surprise to you?
That's no surprise.
Time to start our test the way most of us carry them.
We'll roll this thing all the way up until it touches and has a 0 gap.
Have you ever done that test for anyone else before?
No, I haven't, because it's not a requirement, so the manufacturers don't do it very often.
So the tests are all done?
Tests are all finished.
And?
The number exceeded the limit. It went up significantly with each one of the phones.
That's right. The phones exceeded the safety limit when they were moved right against the body. The radiation absorbed increased 3 to 4 times.
Now in France, the French frequency agency called ANFR has actually been taking phones off the shelf and testing them. They've tested hundreds of phones, and they found 64 models to exceed the EU limits, even with that distance. They've been software updated or just taken off the market because of that. Dr. Marcorazzi is a French doctor who coined the situation phone gate. And he did that at a time when this French agency, ANFR, that tests phones, actually decided to test at body contact. Phones that had a fine print warning of 5 millimeters, they were testing them at body contact. And they found the majority exceeded limits when they were tested close up to the body, like as if they were in a pocket. He calls it a scandal, which I think it is, that phones are not tested the way we use them. Professor Om Gandhi, who helped to develop these limits as an engineer decades ago, actually published a paper on how the French government tests data when analyzed the way we test phones in the United States with a different testing volume, that actually the radiation levels could exceed FCC limits by up to 11 times. In 2019, the French National Agency for Food, Environment, and Occupational Health, ANSES, issued a report recommending that the cell phone SAR measurements be done at 0 millimeters from the body because that reflects the way we use phones today. And French ministers issued a press release calling for this update. As well, the consumer information on phones was updated to ensure that when you bought a phone, there were instructions saying to use speakerphone, to limit children's use, to keep it away from the belly of pregnant women and from the lower abdomen of adolescents. That's actually what it says in the information on the phone. Now, not everyone in France or Europe even knows that, but that information is there. Whereas in the United States, we are certainly not provided that information at all. This is an image from a published case report of a man, 40-year-old man, who developed an intramuscular schwannoma, which is a tumor in his left thigh. And that was exactly where he stored his smartphone, in his front left trouser pocket. There are so many advertisements where phones are used right up to the body or in the pocket.
Meet iPhone 17e. A whole lot for a lot less.
Phones are advertised not just by the cell tower companies, but by clothing manufacturers as being perfectly safe right up against the body. There's even a Girl Scout uniform that has pockets made large enough to fit the largest model of the iPhone. Women carry cell phones in their bras, oftentimes while they have earbuds in. It's a handy place to keep a phone.
When I see a problem, I am going to fix it. America's got a serious problem, so I'm going to get it off my chest. 5G phones, trapped on limited 5G networks. But you can make a difference. If you join T-Mobile, these phones will be able to shine their brightest, like me.
But there are published case reports documenting young women with no genetic history developing breast cancer exactly where the cell phone rested against their chest in their bra.
Donna questioned how she got her cancer since she had no risk factors. The answer, she says, was on her X-ray.
I used to tuck my cell phone into my bra right in this area here. And when I was diagnosed, had imaging done, and the doctors told me that the tumors were in the area of 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock. And they were shaped like the cell phone.
Donna stored her cell phone in her bra for about 10 years, but not anymore.
There's also a case control study from Taiwan showing that excessive smartphone use significantly increased the risk of breast cancer, particularly for participants who had excessive cell phone use and a close distance between their breasts and the smartphone, and who used smartphones a lot right before they went to bed. Now, this comes as no surprise because the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, determined that RF radiation was a Class 2B possible carcinogen back in 2011, based on studies accumulated at that time showing an increased risk of brain tumors, especially on the side of the head where the person used the phone. And one of the reasons they gave for why it was not a probable or proven carcinogen at the time was that there wasn't enough animal evidence showing cancer. Then in 2018, the National Toxicology Program of the United States government published a $30 million study where they tested animals, they exposed animals, and they found what they deemed clear evidence of an association with cancer, because the male rats developed the same tumor types that have been found in studies of humans using cell phones for long term. Malignant schwannomas in the heart and gliomas of the brain. And they also found DNA damage. Now, there was an Italian study by the Ramazzini Institute that also found the same tumor types in their male rats, except they used levels that were much, much lower, meant to mimic base station or cell tower radiation levels. Most recently, Dr. Ronald Melnick and Dr. Joel Moskowitz, on behalf of the International Commission on the Biological Effects of EMF, and that's different than ICNIRP, this is ICBE EMF, they conducted a risk assessment on the data on cancer from the NTP and Ramazzini Institute, as well as studies that showed impact to reproduction, sperm damage, and so forth. They applied methodologies used by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and others, and they found that RF exposure limits, if you use that information, would have to be made tighter, reduced, by at least 200 times to protect from cancer risk. And they also found that based on the data that the World Health Organization reviewed in its systematic reviews, that the limits were 24 times too high to protect against reproductive impacts. Dr. Ronald Melnick in the press release states, "Our analysis clearly demonstrates that the current limits for cell phones and wireless networks are structurally incapable of protecting human health. We urgently need governments to step up and abandon these obsolete guidelines and conduct rigorous risk assessments using modern toxicological data. The science is there. Now we need the policy to catch up so we can protect public and occupational health." Now, this is in contrast to the members of ICNIRP that have long held that their limits are adequate. And they say that because they would argue that harm is not established, that the scientific evidence does not prove that there is harm. And they have been saying this for decades.
So what we have is a whole lot of research that's explored how the electromagnetic energy works and whether or not it can in fact hurt people. This research has been going on for many years, and that's what we rely on when we look to see whether 5G is going to cause a problem or not. There's been a great deal of research looking at the effects of EME on humans. Of course, there's been a lot of work that supplements this using animals and various other methodologies, but certainly in humans, science has tried to identify problems. Because there have been claims by some people of problems, science has tried to verify these claims, but so far it just hasn't managed to do so.
Similar to wildlife in any other country, then I think there's a fair amount of information that can be applied to evaluate the potential harm, and I believe that there isn't any substantive evidence of there being any harm.
Not so easy is explaining close ties with the industry. The ACRBR was created with Telstra funding and Telstra lab equipment. Rodney Croft denies that the industry buys influence.
You have Telstra researchers working through the ACRBR. Your board consists of at least one director who's a Telstra board member, who's a former chief government scientist and a former head of the CSIRO. Can you see the potential for some heavy influence there?
It would still be very difficult. I mean, you really have a board of 6 that make the scientific decisions. Money going into this research comes from a levy on industry, but it goes to government. Government sends it to National Health and Medical Research Council of Australia. They then have independent groups to decide what research is important.
Telstra declined an interview with Lateline, leaving the industry peak body to speak on its behalf.
It's for the scientists to use funds to investigate these subjects. They are very expert at doing so. It's a very complex area. So this industry is responsibly contributing, but in no way influences the outcome of the research.
DNA damage was documented in research by Dr. Henry Lai and N.P. Singh in their laboratory in the mid-90s. But when the scientists shared those findings, they were viciously attacked. And what you are seeing here is a Microwave News article of a leaked memo between the wireless company Motorola and its PR firm. The memo revealed a strategy to war game Dr. Lai's findings, to discredit his research findings and downplay their significance. They lined up scientists that publicly disputed the findings, and they attacked his credibility. This leaked Motorola memo says, "I think we have sufficiently war-gamed the Lai-Singh issue." Now, notably, Burson Marsteller was the PR firm who was consultant to the tobacco industry at the time. It was also organizing a response to an EPA report that had identified secondhand smoke as a human carcinogen. And it created a smokers' rights group, the National Smokers Alliance, to oppose anti-smoking legislation. Wargaming the science is a tactic still used today. This is Dr. Henry Lai speaking about his experience.
And actually, there was an internal memo that leaked out from Motorola, and the memo basically tried to find some way to discredit our results.
As well as other members of the industry, I understand that someone contacted both NIH and perhaps someone else contacted the University of Washington president at the time, trying to get you fired for that?
That's true, yes.
So I have to imagine that was that must have been somewhat surprising to you.
Yes, actually, that was actually very stressful too, and it was surprising because we're scientists and we're never involved in all this kind of like political and so it's kind of a very stressful time after we published the paper.
And this is Jerry Phillips, a scientist who also found effects, and Motorola tried to stop him from publishing the findings.
I moved to California, Southern California. The 60 hertz work that we did was supported by a contract from the Department of Energy. The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this, what sort of spin can we put on this, what can we expect from this, and from that point on the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers. I said, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola, and I got a call from Mays Swycord at Motorola. Now, Mays is the former head of the Center for, CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, and he left the FDA and went to work for Motorola. Keep that connection in mind. That's interesting. He also handpicked his successor at the FDA. Anyhow, Mays didn't like the work. Then there was another phone call. Point is, I kept getting nothing from these people. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study. They didn't tell me not to. They just said, no, this isn't ready for publication. And they wanted me to do more work. I stopped taking calls from them, and I went ahead and published the study. It came out in 1998, and I wanted nothing more to do with any Motorola-related work. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of control. I wouldn't put up with that attitude. That was it. I think one has to exercise caution at this point.
Now, in 2015, the Harvard Edmund Safra Center for Ethics published an expose by investigative journalist Norm Alster on the financial ties between the U.S. federal government and the wireless industry. It's called Captured Agency, and it documents a key strategy of the wireless industry as well as the tobacco industry, asbestos, lead, and pesticide and chemical companies, whereby the federal entities that are supposed to be protecting us are in fact captured by the very industries they're supposed to be regulating, like the wolf watching the hen house. In this report, Norm Alster talked about how the wireless industry has bought inordinate access to and power over this major U.S. regulatory agency, the FCC. That's the agency in the United States that both adopted limits for wireless radiation, authorizes devices, and is greenlighting all kinds of wireless deployments in the United States. This report addresses the revolving door between industry and government, where People are moving from positions in the wireless industry to positions in government overseeing the wireless industry. For example, at that time, Tom Wheeler was the head of the CTIA wireless industry, who then became the head of the FCC. The report also talks about the massive financial investment into lobbying policymakers, the creation of nonprofit organizations to defend the wireless companies, the massive public relations effort, the undermining of the credibility of scientists who found biological effects. The report talks about the misleading statements that there is a scientific consensus when there isn't, the push for minimal regulation, the refusal to accept evidence of harm, and the hyper-aggressive legal bullying and research bullying that goes on. So this is Brendan Carr. He is our current FCC chair in the United States. He is deregulating wireless deployment, trying to fast-track cell towers all across our nation right now. Before he was at the FCC, he worked as a lawyer for Wiley Rein, and that law firm and Brendan Carr himself participated in the San Francisco cell phone right to know lawsuit by the wireless industry. So he was on the side of the CTIA at that time. Now he's the chair of the FCC. This is Meredith Atwell Baker. Years ago, she worked at the CTIA wireless industry. Then she became FCC commissioner. Then she became head of the CTIA wireless industry. Then she stepped down just last year to allow former FCC chair Ajit Pai to now be the head of the wireless industry. And I can't help but share when she did the most incredible greenwashing campaign by the CTIA, where they had a cut out green and blue earth with cell towers all over it. And it was part of their 5G push. They talked about how 5G was going to be green.
And that's why getting the policy right is so key. We shouldn't be radically changing how wireless is regulated right now. We should be making it easier and faster to deploy. And we need to fuel this 5G economy with more and more spectrum.
Ajit Pai used to work for Verizon Wireless. Then he was appointed to the FCC and served as FCC chair. And now he's the new CEO of the CTIA wireless industry. They actually joke about this revolving door. So here's a quick clip of the now CTIA head, Ajit Pai, introducing the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, and joking about how Brendan Carr will at some point be the head of the CTIA.
I climbed a tower, and then he climbed a tower. I drank out of a Reese's mug, and then he drank out of a Reese's mug. I became the chairman of the FCC, and then he became the chairman of the FCC. Ladies and gentlemen, the future CEO of CTIA and the current chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, my good friend, Brendan Carr.
When it comes to regulatory capture, one tactic of industry is to make it so that industry is not saying, hey, we did the science, we know it's safe. The government says it's safe. We're just doing what the government says. Our products are compliant with government limits. The government does the job of evaluating what is safe and what is not us.
And I want to be very clear. Industry has not said once that cell phones are safe. The federal government, the various interagency working groups have all said it's safe.
One of the tactics of big tobacco was to fund science. The science that they funded more often did not show an effect. We see the same thing with non-ionizing radiation. Industry-funded studies are significantly less likely to report adverse effects. Higher quality independent studies tend to show a stronger link between, for example, long-term mobile phone use and brain tumors, but studies with industry funding generally report no significant association.
We looked at the industry disinformation and propaganda campaign that for the past 25 years has been convincing the public that these cell phones are safe. And the way they've done that is to war game the science, as they put it in an internal memo from Motorola. They've funded their friendly scientists, they've attacked critical science, independent science, they've put their own people onto advisory boards. All that said, that's resulted in, I think, the message coming across from the mainstream media, frankly, that cell phones are safe enough.
What I've seen industry do over the years in different countries is work to move the issue of safety away from the public health agencies to the telecommunication government agencies like the FCC, so that the decisions about safety are in the hands of engineers, not public health experts or toxicologists. So the public health entities will err on the side of caution. Prevention is the cornerstone of public health. And I just published a chapter in this book. It's a CRC Press book. It's called The Impact of Anthropogenic Activities in the Natural Environment and Societies During the Contemporary Period. And it is about artificially produced environmental exposures and the impact that it's having. And my chapter is actually about what many other countries are doing in relation to wireless radiation. So for example, Belgium, and actually over a dozen countries, say very clearly that exposure should be reduced, especially for children, that you should reduce exposure to your head and keep it off your lap. The UK Health Security Agency recommends reducing excessive exposure by children, and they list ways that you can reduce exposure, like moving the phone away from the body or using a hands-free kit and keeping calls short. They used to have a lot more resources online, but those were all removed several years ago. Back in 2002, Sir Walter Stewart, the former chief scientific advisor, led a report commissioned by the UK government called Mobile Phones and Health, which found that although exposure to RF radiation below guidelines had not been proven to cause adverse health effects, there is still some scientific evidence which suggests that there may be biological effects, and gaps in knowledge justify a precautionary approach. That report actually made 33 recommendations, including to minimize exposure to children. In fact, in Belgium as well as Israel, cell phones designed for young children are banned. They are prohibited from sale, and also advertising to young children is prohibited as well. The Cyprus National Committee on Children's Environmental Health did a whole campaign with posters plastered on the back of public buses saying, "Don't irradiate me, learn how to protect me." And here's a video from their campaign.
Τα παιδιά μας εκτίθενται καθημερινά σε ένα ηλεκτρονικό νέφος, το οποίο δημιουργείται από την ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi και άλλα παρόμοια. Η ακτινοβολία αυτή, σύμφωνα με τον Παγκόσμιο Οργανισμό Υγείας, είναι πιθανώς καρκινογόνα για τον άνθρωπο. Σύμφωνα με νεότερες έρευνες, η ακτινοβολία αυτή είναι πιθανό να προκαλέσει και άλλες σοβαρές επιδράσεις στην ανάπτυξη και λειτουργία του εγκεφάλου, του αναπαραγωγικού και άλλων συστημάτων του εμβρίου και του παιδιού, να προκαλέσει καταστροφή των νευρικών κυττάρων και του DNA, διάσπαση της προσοχής, διαταραχές στη μάθηση και άλλες νευρολογικές παθήσεις. Τα παιδιά είναι πολύ ευάλωτα. Μπορούμε όμως σε σημαντικό βαθμό να τα προφυλάξουμε από ένα σοβαρό κίνδυνο. Φτάνει να μάθουμε πώς.
Αφού μας αγαπάτε, γιατί μας ακτινοβολείτε με τα Wi-Fi και τα κινητά σας τηλέφωνα? Έχουμε δικαίωμα στην υγεία και πρώτοι εσείς μπορείτε και πρέπει να μας προφυλάξετε.
Στη βάση της αρχής της προφύλαξης, το Συμβούλιο της Ευρώπης, το Ευρωκοινοβούλιο, επιστήμονες, ιατρικοί και εκπαιδευτικοί σύλλογοι στην Ευρώπη συμβουλεύουν ότι θα πρέπει να μειωθεί η έκθεση των παιδιών στην ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi, ιδίως στο σπίτι και στο σχολείο.
Η έκθεση των παιδιών σε ηλεκτρονικό νέφος εγκυμονεί κινδύνους. Η χρήση των κινητών και συσκευών Wi-Fi από παιδιά μικρότερα των 14 ετών πρέπει να αποφεύγεται. Προφυλάξτε την υγεία και το μέλλον των παιδιών σας. Το ίδιο ισχύει και για την έγκυο. Οι έφηβοι ποτέ δεν βάζουν το κινητό στο υπνοδωμάτιο τους, στις τσέπες τους, στα μπράτσα ή κοντά στο στήθος τους. Πάντα χρησιμοποιούν hands-free και κρατούν το κινητό μακριά από το σώμα τους.
Αξιοποιώ την τεχνολογία σωστά. Γνωρίζω τους κινδύνους και δεν εξαρτώμαι από αυτή. Χρησιμοποιώ ενσύρματη σύνδεση για τον υπολογιστή του σπιτιού μου και ενεργοποιώ το Wi-Fi και τα δεδομένα κινητής τηλεφωνίας μόνο όταν χρειάζεται και ποτέ όταν τα παιδιά μου είναι κοντά. Δεν χρησιμοποιώ κινητό τηλέφωνο στο αυτοκίνητο όταν τα παιδιά μου βρίσκονται σε αυτό. Η έκθεση στην ακτινοβολία είναι πολύ μεγαλύτερη. Προστατεύω πάντα τα παιδιά μου.
Η Γαλλία ήδη με νόμο απαγόρευσε τη χρήση Wi-Fi σε παιδικούς σταθμούς και σε χώρους όπου φιλοξενούνται παιδιά κάτω των 3 χρόνων. Επιτρέπει ελάχιστη χρήση στα σχολεία κάτω από αυστηρούς περιορισμούς.
Στον υπηαγωγείο, στο σχολείο και στο σπίτι περνάμε τουλάχιστον το 75% του χρόνου μας. Απαιτούν μια ασφάλεια χωρίς ακτινοβολίες από Wi-Fi, κινητά και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις. Η υγεία είναι δικαίωμα. Μη μας το στερείτε.
Δεν έχουμε το δικαίωμα να ρισκάρουμε την υγεία των παιδιών μας αναμένοντας παθητικά τους άλλους να κάνουν κάτι. Ας ξεχάσουμε τι είναι βολικό για μας και ας τους χαρίσουμε το καλύτερο δώρο, την υγεία τους, μετατρέποντας το σπίτι και το σχολείο σε όαση προστασίας.
Το σπίτι μου είναι όαση αγάπης και ασφάλειας. Σβήνω τα Wi-Fi και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις όταν δεν χρησιμοποιούνται και κυρίως όταν τα παιδιά είναι στο σπίτι και τα κλείνω πάντοτε το βράδυ. Αξιοποιώ το κουμπάκι on-off. Είναι τόσο απλό να μειώσω το χρόνο αχρίαστης έκθεσης. Επενδύω στην υγεία των παιδιών μου μακροχρόνια.
Η ζωή και το μέλλον τους είναι στα δικά μας χέρια. Δώστε στα παιδιά ένα μοναδικό δώρο ζωής, την υγεία τους.
So I did an interview a few years ago with Eileen O'Connor of the Radiation Research Trust. She's been working on this issue for decades. Starting when a cell tower went up near her home in West Midlands, UK, and she developed breast cancer, as did some of her neighbors. She has since co-founded several charitable organizations, and one of the campaigns she worked on was educating the public. Along with other UK-based groups, they created these posters and awareness campaign. These posters were placed in public spaces such as bus depots and service stations. They talked about the impacts to the immune system, memory loss, sleep issues, reduced sperm count, and associations to brain tumors. However, these campaigns were repeatedly attacked by industry groups, leading to their removal every time. The Advertising Standards Agency and other bodies concluded that there was no evidence of harm, and they insisted that the posters be taken down, even though the groups had presented scientific research that had shown associations between exposure and these various effects. And they also had expert opinions supporting their claims, but they were told that they didn't have sufficient proof to allow these posters. This is from a 2011 campaign warning men about fertility risks from carrying the phone in their pockets. Once again, despite published research backing their claims, the posters were removed on the grounds of insufficient evidence.